The lesson.
Oh, yeah.
Bias B,
Go
thanks very much for rolling through, man. All the way in Melbourne. Now, you got a new album that you've just dropped, so we're going to get into that.
Yep.
But I guess I want to sort of talk about the stuff even before the music, because I think your first release was in '98, but you were doing the graffiti thing before you were doing the rapping thing.
Yep.
So can you tell us a little bit about, how you got into, picking up a can and then transitioning into music?
It actually all started watching the movie Breakdance with my mum, laying in bed watching Breakdance.
Yeah, well.
And I was like, I'm sort of feeling it, Ozone and Turbo. There was a bit of graffiti on there, but not really. It was more about the breakdancing thing. And a couple of weeks later, my brother came home from school and he had this outline that said hot. There was some guy around the corner, Matthew Ebbage, and he'd copied it off him. Just like, that looks pretty cool. I'll do one myself. So I did one that said cool. And then some guys up the street, just everyone was doing a little bit of graffiti. Started going to rap dancing lessons, as they were called back then. And that was the start of it. It was just sort of the neighbourhood I was in Greensborough. It was like Sick and Cruz. They're pretty well-known writers. I went to primary school with these dudes. So that was sort of how it all began on the whole graffiti side of things. And also there was a guy around the corner who used to write DK. He was like the god. He was a king in our neighbourhood. Everyone that we all looked up to. He was doing all the walls, all the trains, whatever. And his brother was the first time I actually heard like proper rap music. We had some Run DMC tape. It's like, wow, I love this shit. And that just became the whole basis for what I did right there.
So what are we talking, 80s?
The breakdance would have been probably 84. And then, probably between 85, 86, where all the rest of it popped off.
So then what do you remember, I guess, about, the graffiti scene in Melbourne around that time? Like how much of it was going on? How prominent was it?
I remember going to Eltham, getting on a train and not having a place to put a tag. There was that many tags. It was like 20 crews on one window type of thing. Like everyone was bombing. That was before the cops were, the transits were onto it to actually try and shut it down properly. So the extent of it was just everyone was doing it. And it was a beautiful thing at that time. There's so many styles and everyone building and creating. It was so young and new that everyone was just, developing this whole Melbourne style that came through.
So does that mean that like graffiti in Melbourne started around the early 80s?
Yeah, probably started around 83-ish, 84. That's before I was sort of doing it. I was kind of second or third generation. You had like Prime, USA Crew, KRU, people like that. Sui came up under them. And it was just a nice time around 88, 89. I was never I did more bombing than piecing. I was never like a king or anything like that. I never claimed to be. It was just more being a part of the whole lifestyle, and that's just what we did. Just, every day after school, you just get on the train, just do loops, just tags, and it just became what you were.
So from going from the late 80s into the early 90s, that transitional period, did you notice any sort of significant changes, going on in graffiti in Melbourne at that time? It started off more of a creative thing. But then there was a bunch of crews who were just in it for the criminal side of things. So that scared a lot of the artists off, I found back then. There was a lot of gang sort of shit happening. And I think what actually changed it sounds a bit negative, but it's when the weed came along and the drugs, the people stopped being as creative or wanting to go out, and everyone was sort of just hanging at home, or it wasn't the same. You had this thrill of graffiti and you used to get a fix from it. So then when the drugs came along, I think people, and you got too old to do graffiti anymore, a lot of people fell into that. So that sort of took took it away, but the people who were real passionate about it, loved it, just kept going with the art. I guess that's what shines today with what you see.
And then, so I guess when you talk about, the criminal element that came into graffiti around that time, did you, obviously I imagine that would have been a time where, beefs amongst graffiti crews were pretty ripe.
Yeah, it was they were kind of healthy beefs back then. It was like WCA were battling with CW and you weren't punching on, you were just dissing each other on panels that people did. Well, not that I was doing, Puzz, that type of thing. They were, so it was always sort of healthy beef. It was sort of later on that people started getting
you know, more violent and real serious about it. It was sort of a creative energy, sort of like battle rap, the same thing.
In terms of trains, I mean, when did that become, you know, something for yourself with graffiti?
Well, from the start it was trains. So I guess, you know, it was more the thing you did. It was more the bombing side, because it was really scary to go into a yard. It was actually scary now because there's fences. Back then there was no fences, you could just walk into whatever. But, you know, only being 14, I wasn't a big or a tough kid type of thing. There was some, you know, some hectic units out there. So it was quite scary, but you'd get in there and give it a go. And, you know, it was tough for me to try and do a good piece. I'd need hours on a wall when you're in a yard trying to do it really quick, and I wasn't really up to that level of other people. But it was a great time just seeing, you know, panels. Some would run for months, and you see the same one come back a couple of weeks later. It was exciting. I get on the train, look out the window, and you see a bit of colour at the end, and you just, you know, or you've seen one go past, sit at the station for the next hour and a half waiting for it to come back just to get a photo or just to see it. Spend your days chasing the trains and seeing this artwork.
And then so, like, obviously you've got, you know, you got to worry about the transits. You know, and that's one whole thing. But then I imagine as well, like with the yards in Melbourne, like people get territorial, and you sort of got to watch out for other crews.
Yeah, a lot of that
and
started
things like
happening.
that.
Yeah, people sort of, you know, different neighbourhoods, and they sort of own the yards. You got to watch. On Hurstbridge, it was all right because it was always just sort of WCA and all the people I knew, so it didn't really matter where you paint along there. It's only if you're going to other train lines that'd be an issue. Unless you were down with people, so we were like Puzzle and Pronto, you know, they're in WCA and AC crew, whatever, and DMA, so they could sort of go anywhere, it didn't matter, you know, when you're at that level, everyone just respects you for it. But being one of the young, you know, that wasn't as good, you know, a bit on the toy side of things, you know, you got to sort of know your place and not step over the line.
And then so tell us a bit about your train line, Hurstbridge, because the first time I'm pretty sure that I heard, you know, the name Bias B was when you did that that juicy flip where, yeah, you know, obviously you give shout outs to Hurstbridge. So tell us a little bit about that, because that's a pretty iconic song and kind of put the Hurstbridge line on the map for a lot of us.
Just a really creative line. Like we had, like I said before, DK from MDA crew. He's one of the early ones. Spy and Wisp, TMM. Had Pudgy, Coma, Jewel and Pest. Like these dudes were kings. Like, you know, they're still regarded as kings. They were doing all the trains, whatever. And I was just lucky, I think, to live on that line. Yeah, at the time, it was, and everyone was, they were supportive of each other. It wasn't like there was beef on the line. Everyone was just, sometimes you have 10 to 20 people doing loops one day, just the Greensboro and Eltham, just back and forth. Then over time you get conflict here and there, but overall it was pretty supportive, and it was all about the creativity more than the criminality of it. I'm sure you're out there racking paint and you're trespassing, whatever's going on there. But it was always based on the art and pushing it further.
And so did you predominantly just stay on your line, or did you sort of venture into other lines as well here and there?
I did most of the time. When around the time of around 93-ish, like we'd always like hang at Richmond, or we hang with other riders from other lines, but pretty much kept to our own line. But then when the music side of things, like the Big Bamboo popped off and there was open mic nights, I met a lot of people from down Frankston way. And because my nan lived there, I'd stay there, so I started spending a lot of time down Frankston way. Other people spent more time in the West, etc. I didn't really go there. But we had enough at Hurstbridge that we didn't really need to go anywhere.
And when you went on other lines, did you ever have any issues yourself?
I never did, but I wasn't that prolific, you know. I wasn't climbing into other people's yards to try and do stuff. It was more you just go out bombing for the day and just do tags together. It was never a problem for me.
The lesson. 2-7. Oh yeah.